Hello and welcome to this masterclass presented by Just Like Us for School Diversity Week 2021. School Diversity Week is an event created by Just Like Us to celebrate LGBT+ diversity and representation within schools in the UK. In a few moments, I'll be welcoming our masterclass speakers for today, Martina and Jen Powell, who will be speaking on the question, how has London's LGBT+ community, past and present, used clothing to explore identity? They'll also participate in a Q&A towards the end when they'll be answering some of your questions. But before we get into that, I'll take a moment to talk about safeguarding. Staying safe online is important at all times, and School Diversity Week is no exception, so we've provided a link below to give you some information about how to do just that. Now, I'm so excited to introduce our masterclass speakers. Martina is Learning Coordinator at the Museum of London and a champion for the arts and culture sector. She's passionate to promote inclusive, co-curated programming which shares the lived experiences of London's diverse history in ways that fosters critical thinking, empathy and understanding. Jen is a non-binary London-based performance artist who promotes self-expression while performing as their drag alter ego Adam All since 2008. Adam is the co-founder and host of a drag king cabaret show now in its 8th year. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Martina and Jen Powell.
Hello and welcome to this masterclass led by the Museum of London. We're so happy to be joining you today to champion LGBT+ equality this Schools Diversity Week. My name is Martina and I work at the Museum of London, and today I'm joined by London-based performance artist Jen Powell. The Museum of London is a social history museum which uses a vast collection of objects to tell the story of the capital from its first settlers all the way until modern times by investigating and revealing the lives of everyday people like you and me. Our schools and family programming focuses on celebrating the diversity of Londoners in the past and present. Now today we'll be looking at a handful of objects from the Museum of London collection, which provide evidence of the rich and varied LGBT+ history of London. Some of these objects are included in our online resources, which are great for anyone inside or outside of London who wants to find out about LGBT+ history in general. But today, I'll be taking a closer look at one of the 5 objects featured in those resources, and we'll use it to think about the ways that historic LGBT+ communities used clothing to highlight their identities. But while the museum's resources can tell us a great deal about historic communities, what about today? Is clothing still used by LGBT+ communities to express, explore and challenge identity? Well, that's why Jen is here.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a non-binary performance artist and I live with my wife in London. When I was at school, there was a law called Section 28, which meant that it was wrong for any authority, including schools and its teachers, to say that LGBT+ lives and identities were normal or equal. It meant that I faced a lot of bullying and ridicule for the way that I look, the way that I am, even before I knew much about myself. I came to realise that the way I look can change how people see me and how they treat me. As an adult, I've turned those experiences and my observations into art, and I've become a drag king called Adam All.
What we wear can really change how people see us. That's why we wear smart clothes when we go to an interview or for a formal event. But there are a ton of different things that we learn to pick up from somebody's clothing when we first see them. Their age, their race, their religion, their job title, their taste in music. One of the first things we often see is their gender. But what we wear and who we are isn't always that straightforward. People often think, I'm a man, but it's just the way I look. I wear whatever I want. Because there are so many unwritten rules about what we should wear or what we should look like, some people use these rules to their advantage. They use their clothes to give them an identity, to show their status, or they can use those rules to change the way people think about them, to set people off on the wrong path, to wrong foot them, or they can hide messages in their clothing. It can be really fun to play with clothes, but it can also be really political.
And we do have some pictures of Jen, which Jen would like us to share with you. So these are some photos of Jen in their different types of clothing, kind of reflecting what Jen has just said. But everything that Jen has just said has also been the case throughout history. So let's start by looking at one of the museum's collection items, which are featured in our LGBT plus resources. And then we will hear Jen's reflections. So here we are. This is a type of medieval shoe called a poulain. That's a term which evolved from the French meaning from Poland. Now, these slightly ridiculous looking shoes were at the height of fashion from around the 1370s to 1400, about 20 years after the infamous Black Death ravaged the country. And they were popular again in the middle of the 1400s, believe it or not. Now, there are a few of these poulain shoes in the Museum of London collection, and they typically have long, pointed fronts. Some even extend to over 10 centimetres beyond the toe. Now, such decorated and pointed shoes would only have been afforded by the very wealthy and fashion-conscious sections of society. This shoe, in particular, was found on the site of Barnard's Castle, which once stood where Blackfriars Station is, and sort of between there and St Paul's Cathedral. Now, as this was close to the royal wardrobe, some of the shoes which we uncovered are very likely to have royal connections. But what has this got to do with LGBT plus history? Well, as with many fashion movements before and since, this new trend was a very controversial one to some. The church, who were extremely powerful during the medieval period, associated extravagant fashions, such as these pointed shoes, with any sexuality which was deemed sinful or deviant at the time. That included same-sex desire. Now, they made this connection because these shoes were worn mostly by young men who would stuff the toes with wool or moss to make them hard and pointy and potentially suggestive. Now, also, in the eyes of the church at the same time, this great length of the poulains prevented people from being able to kneel, and therefore it prevented people from being able to pray. Eventually, both the Pope and English lawmakers even passed laws to regulate how long somebody's poulains could be. So I suppose that we could say this fancy footwear was used as a kind of secret symbol of sexuality.
Oh, that's so interesting. I bet it wasn't quite so secret in the underground, hey? Shoes can have so much significance, though. You can learn so much from someone's shoes. A pair of heavyset boots means something completely different from a pair of bright red stiletto heels, of course. There's so many rules in our society about what we wear. We don't really have a lot of say over them either. I mean, have you ever considered the associations we have between the colours pink and blue? Everybody knows pink is for girls and blue is for boys, but I think you'd be surprised to learn just how modern an idea that is. It's only about 150 years ago that they actually put any suggestive significance on colour as associated to gender at all. In fact, before that, babies and young children were all put in white dresses. We've got an example, haven't we? They were all white dresses because it was so. Do we have the slide, or can I show it afterwards? Aha, so like this would have been a dress and pantaloon set for a little boy who would have worn it till he was about 5 or 6 when he was old enough to be put into short trousers. But the white dresses were really good because it was good access for a nappy, easy to clean, and you just pass it down through the siblings. Big Victorian family, you know, it's much cheaper if they can all wear the same stuff over and over. But then there was a very clever advertiser who decided that he'd sell more clothes if he suggested that you should dress your babies in colours that would complement their eye colour. So, for example, you might put a baby with brown eyes in blue, and you might put a baby with blue eyes in yellow. Didn't last long. A few years on, it was actually gender that became the significant characteristic that defined what colour you put your baby in. But back then, surprisingly enough. Blue was for girls, a colour associated with the sky and with the Virgin Mary, light and soft. And pink was for boys, bright and striking and reminiscent of the red military jackets of the era. This young man may grow up to be a soldier. And it was 20 or 30 years before they switched them back round again. And now we just take it as a fact. But really, it's just the way light is absorbed or reflected by the dye and the surface of the material of your clothes that actually gives it any colour. And there's no more significance to it than that, than we personally place on it, socially or culturally.
Absolutely. I think Jen makes some really fantastic points about gender and the way that we often label colours as masculine or feminine. And I think we can say something really similar about the patterns that we wear, especially bright patterns. And so often we associate those colourful or vibrant patterns with really feminine clothing. But why? Take a look at this men's waistcoat, which I'm just going to pop up. Now, this one is really floral, as you will see in just a second. Now, these kind of, it might surprise you, but these kind of floral waistcoats were quite common. Now today, we tend to have quite conservative colours like blues and blacks and browns that we associate with being masculine and we usually see in the men's clothing section. But this waistcoat is from around 1721 to 1740 and you can see it's very chic. It's got colourful silk flowers and as embroidered with gold and silver thread. And of course, this would have been worn by a fairly wealthy person. A wealthy man, I should say. Now, wearing waistcoats like this one, or even pink satin or spangles and flowery patterns, wouldn't have been considered at all extraordinary amongst wealthy or aristocratic circles. And I think Jen would like to show us a waistcoat of theirs.
Actually, I love that waistcoat, and I've got a really nice flowery waistcoat here among many others. I like this one. It's good, isn't it? I really, really like bright colours, actually. And I wear loads of bright colours in my drag. My drag character he's a typically exaggerated man. That's the character I'm going for. But masculine clothing, particularly formal menswear, tends to be pretty boring. Grey, black, navy blue. It's pretty dull. So I've gone out of my way to find something a little bit more fun. So something maybe orange or pink. I've got some great ones in here. How about this nice yellow one? That's good. It's a good colour. And there's lime green as well. I've got loads. Marvellous. Love a bit of that. And I do it on purpose because I want to make a statement about the way men's clothing is restricted by colour. So drag artists do often do things like this. They take these ideas that we have in our society about restricted clothing and they turn them on their head. It's a really good way of making a point, but also it gives you a lot more artistic freedom to be more creative and imaginative with your clothing.
Now we've thought about clothing and its colour and its symbolism, let's consider symbolism in the form of icons and images. Now here's an object in our museum collection which depicts a symbol commonly associated with lesbian identities. This silver earring is in the shape of a double-headed axe called a labrys, a symbol often linked with the Amazons, a mythical tribe of female warriors. Now, lesbians and feminist groups adopted this symbol of the labrys in the 1970s, and wearing jewellery like this earring has been one way for lesbians to indicate their sexuality to those in the know.
Oh yeah, I know all about this symbol. See, when I first came out, I was quite young. I used to go to out youth groups, LGBT plus support youth groups, and in those environments it was a safe space to meet lots of other people, including quite a few older lesbians who told me a little bit about these kinds of symbols. The labrys was definitely one. I knew quite a few people who had a tattoo of a labrys. but people would, yes, wear lots of jewelry, and it was a way of spotting other people in public without sort of giving it away to everybody, so you could sort of spot each other. It was definitely one of those hidden secrets. And actually I did use the symbol in one of my most recent costumes for a big show. I love this outfit. It's my very subtle Labris prop that I used there. Yeah, it's great.
Well, we've entered the 20th century now on our journey through time, and laws were beginning to change by the middle of the 20th century. The 1967 Sex Discrimination Act, for instance, decriminalised sex between two men over the age of 21 in private. Now, this didn't necessarily mean that attitudes were changing at the same pace. In 1970, London's Gay Liberation Front was founded to campaign and protest for rights for gay people. And on the 1st of July 1972, London's first Gay Pride March was held. Now, badges like this one, which should pop up on your screen in a moment, this one's from 1978, so it wasn't from the first march, but a few years later, and this is in the museum collection, and it was worn throughout the 1970s and 80s to celebrate pride and gay activism at a time when wearing badges like this on the streets was a really powerful and quite a dangerous political statement. Sometimes it was met with abuse and violence. Now, this next badge is in our collection, and I find this badge really interesting. The slogan saying "scrap the section" refers to Section 28 of the Local Government Act of 1988, and Jen mentioned this law earlier when introducing themselves. Now, under the legislation, local authorities were prohibited by law from promoting homosexuality by teaching or publishing material. A huge campaign to repeal Section 28 was launched, but the section was only repealed by the government on the 18th of November 2003. Now, do these badges make you think of anything, Jen?
Oh yeah, I wore loads of badges like this. I had absolutely tons of them. I wore them all over myself when I first came out, definitely. I had rainbows everywhere and loads of different slogans and stuff. I did it on purpose though, because I really wanted to do it in the face of my bullies at school and the laws that restricted me. Section 28 affected my entire schooling career. But I had a rainbow on my sleeve, and it looked a little bit like a sort of military rank, and I had badges all down my lapel. I had a rainbow on my car as well when I got a bit older. It was because I wanted to tell everyone that I was proud and unafraid, and it really was frightening to be on the street as an openly LGBT plus person. It really wasn't safe. It didn't feel safe. But for me, I kind of openly LGBT anyway, badges or no. So I wanted to reclaim some of that power and wear my identity openly on my clothes. The rainbow's still massively in use, definitely. The rainbows all over the place. The original 6-colour rainbow is you'll see it all over the place. We have a new rainbow flag now. It's called the Progress flag. I really like it because it helps to raise awareness of and lift the voices of marginalised groups within our own communities. We have a black and brown stripe for people of colour in our community. We have a pink, light blue and white stripe as well for our trans siblings. I think it's fantastic to see it around, and it really helps to understand how far we've come. We've really overcome quite a lot of the restrictive laws that have made life harder for the LGBT plus community, and we've really fought very hard for equality. We've kind of almost won, which is fantastic, and it's not the case in every country across the world. It's important to remember though that not everybody who wears a rainbow flag is actually part of the LGBT plus community. Some people outside of the community also wear these badges. We call these people allies. I think they're great because when I see somebody wearing a rainbow anywhere out and about, it makes me feel welcome and safe, and it also displays to anyone who's still got derogative views, who still is against LGBT equality, that harmful behaviour is just not going to be tolerated. It definitely makes me feel much safer. Also, allies are great for helping us lift our voices. When you're part of a minority, it's hard to be heard above the majority. So allies can really help to lift our voices and help us be heard. And then we can help to change the way society behaves with us so that we can live a more full and equal life.
I'm so glad you said that, Jen, because it makes me feel extremely proud for wearing my rainbow lanyard every day I go to work, because I am an ally.
Thank you for that.
So we've seen a whole range of different items of clothing that can have significance in how we are viewed or how we're perceived. And we've also learned about clothes and how they've been used to make specific or coded messages throughout time. And these ideas span centuries and continents, and they crop up in different ways in every culture on the planet. But it's really important to remember that they are just clothes. They're just bits of cloth or leather that we hang off of our bodies. So to cover ourselves and to keep ourselves warm or protected. And it can be fun to play with clothing, and some people place real significance on what we wear and how that should connect to who we are. But excluding cultural significance or religious clothing, they are just clothes. So be free to explore what makes you feel happy. Now, to finish today's masterclass, we'd like to get you thinking about what we've said and to take a moment to reflect on clothing. So I'm going to put up on the screen a slide with some suggestions of what you might like to think about after today's session or now. So picture a celebrity in your head, or even find a photo of them on Google, and think about what they usually wear, how they style their hair, whether the colours they wear have any particular relevance or associated with anything generally. Are their clothes from a particular culture? Do their clothes have any motifs, words or symbols? Like Jen mentioned, maybe they wear a rainbow. Now, what do you think they're trying to say about themselves through the way they're presenting themselves and their own appearance? And finally, does their appearance actually tell us everything? We hope your answer is no here. Clothing is just clothing, as we've said. A person might try to portray a certain appearance or send a particular message through the clothes that they wear, just as people have throughout history, but it doesn't reflect their entire identity. Now, after today's masterclass, do take a look on the Museum of London's website to find our LGBT+ history resources for secondary schools. You'll find a very colourful timeline highlighting some landmark events in LGBT+ history, a really handy frequently asked questions document which explains some of the language we use in the resources and why some LGBT+ lives are very difficult to unearth in the archives and in museum collections like ours. And finally, there's 5 mini information packs about objects spanning from Ethel Smythe, a famous suffragette and a composer who had numerous relationships with women, to the tragic story of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, the one who built the wall, and his young male lover, and even Wilgefortis, a bearded Christian saint who was a female. Now, thank you so much for joining us today, and we really hope that what we've shared has got you thinking.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for that amazing masterclass. I think everyone has really learned a lot from that. And now it's time to answer some questions from our audience. So I hope you're ready. All of our questions today have been submitted by school students and will be asked on their behalf by some of our Just Like Us ambassadors. So to crack this off, we've got Marco asking you the first question.
Hi, thank you very much for the amazing presentation. And I have a question for Marina. Has London always had such a huge LGBT+ community?
Ooh, so The simple answer is that it's really difficult to know. The stigma surrounding LGBT plus identities throughout history has meant that people often lived in secrecy and in fear. Remember that in English law, it was once illegal and even punishable by death to be gay. Now, lesbianism has never been illegal, but it has been marginalised and remained hidden, as have other LGBT plus identities. And that means it's quite difficult to uncover these stories in our collections. Even where we do have records, we need to remember that the language used by people of the past has changed a lot over time. So before the 20th century, terms like lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans were rarely, if ever, used. And today we might view historic Londoners as part of the LGBT plus community, but in the past they might not have identified with these labels or even known what they are. It's also really important to mention at this point that people from Black, Asian and other minority ethnic backgrounds are often missing from conversations around LGBT plus people in British history. This is not due to a lack of stories and experiences to tell, but because of issues with how our records have been kept. So most LGBT plus people who have managed to record their experiences came from privileged, white and wealthy backgrounds. Historically, people from BAME backgrounds in Britain weren't often in privileged enough positions to actually record their stories in a lasting way. So many of them have been lost. So in a really short way of answering your question is we don't know, and there are lots of layers as to why we don't know.
Thank you very much.
That's a really great question. I think a lot of people probably wondered the same thing. The next question is going to come from Lily.
Hiya, hi. I have a question. So has LGBT plus fashion always been as dramatic as it is now?
That's a really interesting question. And again, rather annoyingly, I have to kind of answer it by saying that it's quite difficult to know because these stories have been hidden. Things which we might potentially associate with people from the past who we would associate with being gay or lesbian, they might have just been sort of lumped in with the rest of society, and so we might consider those to be just the general mainstream fashions of the time, but actually those people had those identities but didn't necessarily identify with them. So again, really kind of vague answer there, but hopefully that kind of explains why we don't know. But I do love that idea of the changing fashion world and how, of course, LGBT plus communities have really had a big influence, and particularly since the 1960s and 1970s when attitudes and laws did begin to change.
Thank you.
Brilliant. It is a really great thing to be able to look back and wonder, and the mystery is kind of fun. So next we have Gabriella.
Hi, my question's for Jen, and it's which piece of clothing do you wish would make a comeback?
Well, I'm a big fan of drama and flamboyance, and I like bright colours, so I'm naturally drawn towards the French Renaissance style of gentleman's attire. I would really like to see, rather than a particular item, I'd like to see a lot more fluidity about the way that we dress, and I'd like to see a lot more expression and joy and sensuality in particularly male clothing. So that's beginning to happen. We're seeing that happening with some of our celebrities at the moment, pushing for that, and I know a lot of people who do that all of the time, but I'd like it to be more commonplace and something that we don't see as in any way jarring, that it's much more celebrated. I think it's a wonderful way to express yourself, which is something I think we need to address in terms of masculinity.
That's a brilliant question. Thank you so much. And the next one is going to come from Lydia.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. I found it so interesting. My question is for Jen as well. Who is one of your LGBT plus fashion icons?
It's got to be Billy Porter, isn't it? Hands down. What a legend! Absolute legend. Pretty much everything they wear, absolutely everything. I mean, I'm obsessed. To be fair, I can't stop staring at them. They're fabulous. There isn't anyone else for me. No, there's loads. There's loads of brilliant people out there, but for me, it's Billy Porter. If you don't know much about Billy Porter, go and look him up.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people are gonna look them up. You meet them, sound amazing. And then our final question for you is from Amy.
Hiya, thank you so much for the insightful talk so far. My question is for Marina. Are there any other pieces of clothing in the museum collection which LGBT plus people might find interesting?
Absolutely. So in general, the Museum of London's Dress and Textile collection has a really interesting selection of clothes, ranging from garments that were made at home to those produced in really high-end London studios, and gowns worn on really grand occasions, to those worn every day. And a large number of these have been digitised, and you can see them on the museum's website. But if we're talking more specifically about objects and clothing related to LGBT plus people from the past. And personally, I really love our collection of men's clothing and accessories worn by a guy called Francis Golding. He was an award-winning architect and London fashion icon. And we very recently got a lot of his clothes. And the collection includes the suits that Francis and his partner wore in their civil partnership ceremony in 2006. And I think what makes these suits really special is that they kind of mark a milestone in a move forwards towards public acceptance of homosexuality, as we've kind of talked about in the masterclass. And it also really reminds us, or at least it reminds me, that marriage equality for lesbian and gay people wasn't achieved until the law changed in 2013. And just one piece of clothing can remind you of all that. And for me, I was alive then, I was a teenager then, and it just seems crazy. But of course, clothing is just one part of the museum's really wide-ranging collection, and I'd definitely recommend taking a look at our LGBT plus resources, just to discover some of the other stories told through things like photographs and play scripts and statues, and we have a pilgrim badge, which, how does that relate to LGBT plus history? So definitely have a look at those. But hopefully in our masterclass and through Jen's answers and my answers, we've kind of given you a lot of food for thought there.
Thank you so much.
I think a lot of people are going to go and look at those resources now. You make them sound amazing. And that is our final Q&A question for you. Thank you so much for that brilliant masterclass and for answering all of our questions today. So that's the end of our masterclass. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a real pleasure to listen to you both speak today. And thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join in and listen and ask those brilliant questions. This masterclass is coming to an end, but please do have a look at the other amazing masterclasses happening this School Diversity Week by heading to www.justlikeus.org/masterclasses. You can also look for more online safety resources on the Just Like Us website as well. And to learn more about those resources, please do head to @Museum of London to find them. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you have a brilliant School Diversity Week.